Hello everyone, this is Aussies Elect, and today we are taking a look on the idea of whether Albanese will expand both houses of the Australian Federal Parliament. This is a idea that has been going around recently. A couple of other YouTubers have made a video, so I want to give my take on it and look at sort of like the mathematics of it and who it would actually favor, why Albo would or wouldn't do it. Firstly, I just want to have a quick look at this little map made by Six News, a projection. They've used opinion polling, and I guess they've like done averages and looked at state polling and stuff like that, and just sort of made some kind of projection for how they think things would change. The most interesting thing I think that they've projected is that One Nation are going to finally win a House seat for the first time. So they think that One Nation will win the seat of right if the projections are correct. There's also some other interesting results like independents winning a couple of seats but also losing a couple of seats. But One Nation have obviously been up in the polls lately. They're up at like 12, 13%, even ahead of the Greens in some polls. This average is giving them ahead of the Greens. Yeah, we're finally starting to talk about whether One Nation could possibly win a House seat. In the 1998 election, another election where they did quite well, I believe they got about like 9% of the vote in the Senate. And Pauline Hanson tried to win a seat herself in the lower house, the seat of Blair, which is right next to the seat of Wright. And she unfortunately failed to do that. But One Nation are actually polling higher than they were in 1998. So maybe they have a chance. But what I want to say about this map is that if Albanese did expand the House of Representatives, and I believe probably the number that he would go for to expand the House of Representatives is about 30 or 35. I'll get to why in a second. But if he were to expand the House of Representatives, it would probably make it a little bit easier for a party like One Nation to actually get some representation in the House. It would probably make it a little bit easier for the Greens to, and for some independents. But it would also give the Labour Party and the Liberal Party more seats. However, I do think that mathematically, the people that would benefit the most are the coalition. So some people have been suggesting that it would mostly help the Labour Party because the seats that would presumably be added would be in cities and Labour doing well in cities. But the Liberal Party does have a little bit of a base in the sort of outer suburbs. Think like the Sunshine Coast area or the Gold Coast area or Canning in WA or Hume in New South Wales. Also like Lindsay in New South Wales. They do have a bit of a base in the outer suburbs, and I think you would get possibly a few more outer suburban seats too. Dr. Kevin Bonham did an article about expanding Parliament, and he's saying that it might also help the Liberals because coalition seats currently have more electors in them than Labour seats. So presumably, if there was this big redistribution of all the mainland states, you would see some of these seats where the coalition have higher electors maybe even out a bit more, and so there isn't like this underrepresentation of electors in coalition held seats. And it's also the fact that the Labour Party has, over the last two elections, gotten these brand new members elected because they won two elections in a row. And as we saw in a seat like Bullwinkle, perhaps the swing won't be as high in completely vacant brand new seats than in seats where there'll be a sophomore effect in which a Labour member was elected last term, and that usually helps their vote in the subsequent election a little bit more. So we wouldn't say that. Those two factors would help the coalition. But I've also done a little bit of mathematics, and I don't think this is by any way an exact science, but I've looked at a 185 seats model and a 181 seats model. And in both of these models, the coalition would presumably get a higher percentage of seats in an expanded parliament than they do now. Now, all this is doing is working out how many seats each state would get for each of these models, and then sort of just like stretching the results of seats in those states. So why this might help a little bit is that it sort of points out the fact that the places where there won't be an expansion of seats, if it moves to a 185 or a 181 seats model, are in the Northern Territory, the ACT, and Tasmania. And all three of those states are quite strong for the Labor Party, especially the ACT. It would not get any more seats. Tasmania has always been, at least as far as I remember, quite a left-wing state. and they're currently way overrepresented in the House because of constitutional matters. And their number of seats would not change because even with 185 seats or 181 seats, they would still be overrepresented. I don't think Tasmania is sort of proportionally represented, the minimum being 5 seats, until you get to about like 225 seats or something like that. So Tasmania still overrepresented, and so they won't be getting any more seats. ACT and Northern Territory sort of have reached their sort of limit for a while as well. Especially the ACT, both of those seats are quite helpful for the Labor Party. If we only expand to 181 seats, I will mention that South Australia gets kind of screwed. They only get 12 seats, while in the 185 seats structure, they get 13 seats. But as you can see here, Queensland gets 8 more seats in the 185 seats model and 7 more seats in the 181 seats model. And we all know that Queensland is easily the most coalition friendly state. Of course, like the bigger states get around 10 more as well. But generally, these bigger states getting seats and these smaller state and territories not getting seats will be slightly helpful for the coalition. And actually, as you can see here, Labor would suffer only like a tiny little bit. Greens won't really change much, and independents won't really change much either. So the idea that this would help the Labor Party, I don't really see that. I mean, maybe is some arguments for it, and Kevin Bonham is sort of theorizing as to why exactly Labor Party would do this when it wouldn't even help them. And so I would like to move on to the second part of the video, which is discussing the Senate and who it would help there. So I'm going to cut to the chase and show you what the Senate would have looked like after the last 2 elections if we had the 7-seat model. Now, the reason that I, for the House, have done a 185 seat structure and a 181 seat structure is that I'm not sure if Albanese would actually add an extra Senate seat or 2 extra Senate seats in the territories. There was talk actually last term of Albanese adding 2 extra Senate seats to each territory, but that sort of just completely fizzled out. And I know that David Pocock has been advocating for them to add more. I think he wanted like 5 or 6 or something, but that's not going to happen. Now, I don't know what Albo would do here. I would say it's a little bit of a coin flip. The argument for increasing it to 4 is mostly because when the territory seats were first created, they decided to do 2 so that it wouldn't change too much the left-right balance of the Senate at the time, because like presumably the major parties would win 1 each. So it wouldn't be seen as sort of biased one way or another, them adding territory seats in order to like help one major party over another. So it was a way of seeming like sort of less corrupt about the idea of adding territory representation, because I think Gough Whitlam, he really wanted the territories to have some representation in the Senate. So if you were going to sort of keep with the same idea, you would add 2 more, because then there wouldn't be seen as any sort of changing of the current left-right balance of the Senate. Theoretically, you would get like 2 left and 2 right senators for each territory. But of course, we know that's not the case with the ACT anymore. What's interesting is that in the last federal election, if there was only 3 senators elected for each territory, the Liberals would miss out with both. So that would make me think that maybe Albanese would be more inclined to want to just expand the territories to 3 seats rather than 4. Now, I think even with 2 seats, the territories are still overrepresented, at least if you compare it to New South Wales, but perhaps even like sort of the national average as well. So even if you expand Parliament to 181 or 185 seats, 3 seats is more than enough for the territories, really. And that's why when I did my electoral reform video of how I would like to reform the electoral system, even though I increased the number of House seats to over 220 seats and number of Senate seats to over 100 seats, I still kept the territories on 3 seats because it's still more than fair for them to have 3 seats. And when I actually asked some of my fellow political YouTubers whether Albo would increase it to 4, 3, or keep it the same, they thought that even if Albo expanded the House and the Senate, they would keep the number of Senate seats the same. So I'm sort of going the middle ground here and suspecting that maybe Albo might just keep it on three. I agree with Kevin Bonham that I don't buy the argument that, like, oh, Tasmania is so overrepresented, so we need to increase the territory Senate numbers to accommodate for Tasmania being so overrepresented. Tasmania is a state. Too bad. They're going to be overrepresented. It's in the Constitution. You can't change that. We're not fixing anything by giving the territories like 6 senators or something like that. 3 is more than enough for both, in my opinion. If they do 4, cool. But it would actually probably, at least based on last election results, be advantageous for the Labour Party if they just increased it to 3. And as you can see here, it would mean that the Labour Party has 3 more senators if they increased it to 3 as opposed to 4, where they would only have 1 more senator. So, how did I get this result? So, I would have liked to tell you that I came up with this on my own, but I haven't. This is actually data sourced from this website, Concrete STV Server, which uses actual ballot data to sort of make it so you can rerun elections in different states and territories at the last federal elections, and I guess also the New South Wales Legislative Council and the New South Wales local government elections as well. I don't know. There's a lot of effort put into this website. Absolutely overwhelms me. I could never do anything like this. But instead of me just trying to guess who I think would have won, and my guesses would have been very different. I'll tell you. I'll tell you that. I've just used this website to work out who would have won with 7 senators, and I got this website actually from this blog post from the Tally Room, where it actually tells you right here how many extra senators would be elected from each party if there was a certain amount of senators at the last couple of elections. So I don't think that Albo would increase the number of senators to 8 or 9. Really, what you can see here is that it really benefits the major parties the most. Like, a lot of people talk about how it's going to benefit minor parties. Also, definitely does benefit One Nation. That is true, and sometimes the Greens. But the major parties get the most of the brunt of the benefits, and that is especially the case in 2022, where the coalition would have got 4 more seats, and the UAP would have actually missed out on that seat in Victoria. That's just sort of like the peculiarities of STV, where sometimes where there's 1 more seat, a party might miss out. It's an odd system, but I think it works pretty well. So I think there's something about like a weighted Gregory average that needs to change, according to Kevin Bonham. But generally, the way the Senate system works is pretty good. But yeah, coalition very much benefit from this pretty much just as much as the Labour Party does, if not more. So especially as like they are more likely to have One Nation coalition partners. And if we go to the Senate tab of this document, I've done some sort of number crunching, and you can see like Labour Party with 4 senators in ACT and NT would have 39% of the senators as opposed to 38%. And if there was only 3 senators in ACT and Northern Territory, as I saw before, they would do even better with 40%. So this might be actually why the Labour Party might decide to increase the number of parliamentarians, not necessarily to help them in the House, but to help them in the Senate, where they will get slightly more representation. The downside, I guess, is that One Nation would get slightly more representation. The Greens actually get hit pretty hard. They go from like almost 16% of seats to like 13 or 13 here. That is because it's very difficult for the Greens to win an extra Senate seat, even with 7 senators. One thing I will note about the Greens is that they actually would have won in 2022 in the Northern Territory. I believe even if it was just 3 senators, but also 4 senators. So the Greens do benefit from an increase in territory senators, but not really if you add 2 more seats to each state. Yeah, so with 3 senators, you would have 90 seats, and that's when you get like 181 House seats. And then with 4 senators, you'd have 92 seats, and that's where you would get 185 House seats. I know it doesn't add up to exactly double, but that's just because I just found that the maths worked the best with these numbers of House seats. David Pocock also would have gotten 2 Senate seats at the last federal election in ACT under both 2 and 3 Senate seats. That's right. The Liberal Party would not have won a seat even if the ACT was increased to 3 seats. David Pocock did really well in 2025. One Nation's only extra pickup would be in South Australia in 2025, which I actually find surprising. I actually thought that the One Nation Party would win some of these last Senate seats in 2022 as well, but it seems that the coalition sort of just soaked up all those right wing preferences, including in Victoria, where under this scenario, the UAP misses out. But yeah, this is a really cool website. This is really helpful. Like if I were to like look at this myself, and I actually tried to do this earlier this year to try to guess who would win in an expanded Senate. I did sort of a similar thing for my electoral reform video. I was thinking of making a video about this earlier in the year, and like I would have like given like a Senate seat to like Nick Xenophon down here in Group O in 2022 in South Australia, and obviously, yeah, that is not going to happen. I don't think he even wins a. So no, he doesn't even win a Senate seat in 2022 under 9 senators. So yeah, Nick Xenophon, unlucky. I'm not actually sure if this legalized cannabis is in Queensland or Victoria, but you can do that all yourself. I might use this calculator later on when I make some other sort of electoral reform videos because it is really cool. So what is the final conclusion from this video? Well, I don't think that expanding the parliament would help the Labour Party that much in the House, but I do think that it would help the Labour Party in the Senate, especially if they increased it to only 3 seats in each territory. It seems like a good way to sort of screw the Greens. An extra One Nation senators might not necessarily be a bad thing because I think what the Labour Party is always looking for is ways to pass legislation without needing the Greens. They almost got that last federal election. Let's see, 36, it's 41, 43, 45. Just don't have it under this model either. But if they had another good federal election and say we're able to win 3 seats in Tasmania again, then it would actually be possible for the Labour Party to pass legislation without needing the Greens, which is something I think they would value quite highly, and that may be just enough for them to increase the size of parliament for more than just like a, I don't know, a seemingly selfless reason like, oh, there's too many electors for each seat and like Australians need more representation, blah, blah, blah. I would obviously support it. The only, I think, problem with it would be that it would be harder to change the electoral system to a one more that I would want in the future, because it would mean that electorates would have to get bigger, and people won't want that. People really like having their local representatives. Of course, I do think there being more seats and smaller electorates would be a good thing, and I definitely think that we would get more independents and minor parties elected, which means more representation for people who usually would not see any representation at all, and who I think really deserves to have representation. That's my take on the situation. I'll have more videos about Australian politics very soon. Goodbye. Oh, I just realized I didn't talk about hypothetical double dissolutions at all this video, but I think I will save that for a separate video. So if you're interested, subscribe, and that one will come out in due time. Also, I think that if Albo goes to an election with an expanded Senate, he will have to go to a double dissolution. So if I do make a video predicting how Albo would go with an expanded Senate, I will be also talking about double dissolutions in that one. So it might be all in sort of the one video, I don't know yet. Thanks again for watching.